think we can all agree that Project Moon, over the years and in the span of the 3 games they've released, has made some very interesting characters, all equipped with their own unique quirks and characteristics, and each also carrying their own themes that is often represented and explored pretty well in their own respective sub-stories. But of course, just like any other media, most people tend to have one character that probably stands out among all the others, one that they probably resonate with the most. And that character for me, as you can probably guess by the title/thumbnail of this video, is Honglu, as I believe that what Project Moon did with his character, his struggles, and just the fact that he as a character serves or will serve the role of one of the most important figures in the city itself is what makes him so interesting. Now obviously, saying all of this without getting into great detail about why I like this Chinese nepo baby so much would be pointless, so that's what I precisely intend to do with this video. So let's just get into it. So, as you can probably guess, there are usually a couple of reasons why a character would appeal to you in the way they do. And as I've said, whilst writing is obviously important, one other aspect that some tend to ignore is just how much you relate to the character in general. And an even more obvious one is how much you just like the character's personality overall. And that's all to say that I personally have always liked Honglu's bubbly, cheerful personality from the get-go. In fact, a previous character from a previous game PM created that I also really liked was, you guessed it, Chesed. And I'm sure we can all at least agree that these two characters are quite similar at a first glance. The ability to just keep a cheerful and easygoing personality, even when surrounded by a world that is to its core brutal and horrifying, is not only a breath of fresh air, but sometimes, if you think about it, a necessary role to uphold morale. Now, obviously the story doesn't quite end there. As you know, most personalities that belong to every unique individuals are usually shaped by the environments they grew up in, and also the characters they interact with on the daily. And with that knowledge I just gave you, and we pan the camera back to Honglu, at a first glance you would assume, wow, he must have grown up in a very loving environment and had the best childhood and never went through any suffering whatsoever. Well, you see, what I think Project Moon does particularly well with their characters is how they craft the backstories for each character that, for the most part, make sense in the resulting qualities that each character has. And of course, that's no different when we talk about Honglu himself. So, now comes the question, what is it that makes his story amongst all the others stand out so much to me? Well, to put it simply, it has everything to do with the theme centered around his own struggles, and that being the theme of repression. Of course, if you haven't figured it out by now, Honglu is supposed to represent the token rich kid who, when depicted in other medias, are usually portrayed as being sheltered and privileged, which, don't get me wrong, is also for the most part true for our ditzy Chinese dude, but as this is the city, things are usually not as simple as it is. Throughout the story, Honglu usually takes a more background role when compared to some of the more proactive sinners, and when he does actually make the rare appearance, it's usually him just being curious about a particular subject, which, as I've said, probably resulted in the sheltered life he had before joining Limbus company. This is even further proven that he sometimes can also seem a bit insensitive and even absent-minded with his comments. Anyways, going back to the point I made earlier about how most people's personalities and etiquette are shaped by the environment they grew up in, and how the thing I like most about Honglu is the struggles that he unfortunately is surrounded with, we can finally connect the dots between these 2 points and figure out how they correlate to each other. Well, to do exactly that, we need to actually take a glimpse at Honglu's backstory. Honglu, birth name Jia Baoyu, is born to the mighty and illustrious Jia family, who are themselves the rulers of Wu Wing. Furthermore, he is also a direct descendant and possible successor to the position of hierarch of the family, both titles that is held by his grandmother. And as you can probably imagine, being such a high-ranking/prominent figure at such a young age, whilst it might seem as an ideal position to be in, especially for the average folk from the slums of the backstreets who aren't really privy to the politics of the city, it also comes with its own sets of struggles, which is also something I've previously discussed in one of my previous videos, about how different people with different financial status often has different sets of circumstances they have to deal with that is specifically unique to them. And this is all to say that I think no character in the entirety of the series so far has portrayed this topic better than Honglu himself. Now obviously, and I'm not trying to sound like a broken record here, but whilst it might seem that from the surface, his life will probably seem perfect, as of course he was born into a prestigious family, he most likely also doesn't need to concern himself with how to put food on the table or whether he'll ever run dry of his wealth, and has to inevitably find a new job, and slowly but surely climb the social ladder all the way to the top like most of everyone else. In a highly capitalistic society like the way the city is portrayed as, he was basically born at the very top. But again, as he is essentially an important asset to Hongyuan as a whole, this unfortunately places him in a very dangerous position that, if I were to take a guess, he didn't want to be at in the first place. Frequent assassination attempts, bearing the burden of being the potential leader of an entire wing, constantly fearing who he could actually trust amongst his family members, who might very easily just one day stab him in the back, are just some of the burdens he has to bear with just because he carries the status that comes along with his birth. And mind you, I didn't even get to the part where, you know, he was possibly like what, 12 during all this? Now of course, whilst having to experience all of that in your earliest memories of childhood would probably suck for just about anyone, even for essentially a nepo baby like Honglu himself, it unfortunately goes so much worse for him, because at the root of all this trauma, we find none other than his own grandmother. But we really can't start talking about the evil Chinese grandma herself without actually discussing about the wing she rules directly over, Hongyuan, which is particularly famous for their singularity that has the sole purpose of creating these ascensions of treatment called policies, which of course is very similar, at least in its results, to the healing ampules distributed by K-Corp. But unlike K-Corp, whose ampules usually solve the problem by reverting a physical body to its previous form, H-Corp's policies more so evolves/mutates the body. As for the creation process for the polis itself, it's undoubtedly also more complex and situational, as in it takes in a lot of environmental conditions, most of which are related to concepts deep-rooted in Chinese culture, such as Taoism. So, why is all of this information even relevant? Well, that's because these policies, while sold generally to the public, also pertains a heavy connection with the important actors of Hongyuan, namely their main military force known as the Heisho Packs, and also their elders. I won't go into crazy depth about the Heisho, but from what we know so far, they are based off of the 12-year cycle of the Chinese lunar calendar, with each different zodiac representing each different Heisho pack, and each single Heisho pack are also unique and possesses different traits/talents that separates them, probably a consequence of their body mutating differently from the effects of taking the different kinds of wall uses. And one other very interesting thing about the Heisho is their confirmed direct connection with creatures that resides within the outskirts. Speaking about creatures from the outskirts, we obviously know that the city itself isn't necessarily lacking of these bizarre creatures, and I don't think it is represented better than the Shenren, aka the Elders of Hongyuan. Now, calling them the Elders of Hongyuan would probably be the biggest understatement of the year, because what they really are the former authoritative figures that once ruled the wing, but have since stepped down from their position and passing on the title of Hierarch, while secretly having their lifespan indefinitely extended by letting the Anamna worm take possession of their body, or rather, their very soul, because of course, you can't make a story that ties into Chinese concepts without having Chinese emperors in the late stage of their life trying to unveil the secrets of immortality. So, getting back to the earlier topic, as you can imagine, the things I just told you earlier, they happen mostly on the backstage, as in, it's not common knowledge that is openly disclosed to the public, and you can probably guess the reason as to why, since one of, if not the most important part to ensure the survival of a wing, lies in its singularity, the secrets to which are only spread reliably amongst the higher echelons that makes up said wing, a position that, you guessed it, our favorite nepo baby, unfortunately by no will of his own, has landed himself in. One can only guess as to what the reaction of the average H-Corp employee would be had they possessed this extensive knowledge pertaining to their place of employment. Imagine finding out that your boss is not only a power-hungry, nigh ageless, and possibly immortal woman who has spent most of her lifespan vying for a seat amongst the other retired hierarchs, who are by now a barely walking rotten carcass who are only living thanks to the power of a magical evil worm, but also someone who once coerced the downfall of their previous wing by manipulating them into breaking a taboo and summoning the head itself. Oh wait, you don't have to guess, cause those employees are swiftly rid off by the Heisho. Well, what if I tell you that these are all knowledge that Honglu was forced to learn in his childhood, knowledge that had to be inherited for the sake of the continuation of Hongyuan, both in a business sense, but also quite literally. And an even crazier revelation regarding the Bolas is how they actually have an even deeper connection to Honglu himself, more specifically his left eye. You see, in the actual book, Jia Baoyu was born with a piece of jade in his mouth, as the name Jia Baoyu itself literally translates to precious jade. The jade itself being a piece of leftover from the walls of heaven that is meant to foresaw the impermanence of human life. Well, transitioning back to the Jia Baoyu of Project Moon, who, unlike Disney, who is known to create a more child-friendly version of a grimdark story that already exists, it does the exact opposite, where it turns an already grimdark story into an even more messed up version of itself. As you see, the jade that Honglu has in his left eye is actually a result of him consuming a special bolus. Okay, well, I said consuming, but it was more so forcefully implanted in him by none other than his own grandmother to function as a live feed camera for the aforementioned elders, who probably themselves are bound to the temple because of their frail bodies and unable to experience the world outside without the help of a third party, and that third party being, you guessed it, Honglu himself. So, after knowing the full context of his story, you could probably imagine the severity of the lifelong trauma that the man carries. But his story isn't actually complete yet, as we are still missing one very important aspect to his character, and that is the concept of nihilism. The Surrendered Witnessing is the title that Project Moon came up with to describe the events in Canto 8. And I still think it's the title that fits and describes the main sinner of the canto the best. You see, a very common theme throughout his suffering that I've only briefly mentioned about earlier is again repression. Now, I'm by no means a therapist or anything of the sort, but when suffering through extreme lifelong/life-changing traumas, it is generally considered a good idea to confide in a certain individual that you yourself have trust in, as sharing the burden you're carrying can generally make you feel more relieved. But what happens when your every move, every action, and every good intentions are all nullified by the fact that you're constantly being monitored, being told that it'll never surmount to anything consequential for every single day of your life, and to top it all off, having to find out that the only person you could reliably confide in was one day harmed to an unknown extent by outside forces, just because you wanted someone to share your struggles with. Well, that's essentially what happened with our little guy. He's essentially given up on doing anything that he considers to have its consequences. It's grinded his mental state down over the years, to which in his late childhood to even adulthood, he thought that decisions are all irrelevant. In fact, nothing he does or what anyone does is relevant, because that's what he's been taught growing up, that none of his choices matter, essentially forced into a state of utter emptiness. Alright, so now you get the gist of his story, but obviously a story isn't complete without a proper conclusion. And with that being said, the conclusion to his story isn't complete without one more crucial character. When you talk about characters that play an important role in Honglu's life, out of the bat, a few names might pop up in your head. And that's not even including the sinners and LCB in general. But one character that sticks out like a sore thumb would be his adopted older brother. Much like Honglu, Kongqiu was born to one of, if not the greatest of noble houses, vying for the throne of the H-Corp hierarch. But due to the incident on that day, we've come to find out that the Kong family was basically ruined, with Kongqiu himself from then on basically left with no choice but to join the greater Jia family. One of the greatest aspects of Canto 8 was how PM constantly made you feel Honglu's aspiration, how alienated he is to the characters that surrounds him, as obviously he can't really just open up about the things he's been forced to see to even his closest friends, which then probably prompts his mind to think that he's just supposed to live out his life in secrecy, since if anyone were to, God forbid, find out what's been happening, well then, as we've come to find out, a fate worse than death would probably await that person. And this is where Kongqiu's role comes into play, and a crucial one at that. You see, throughout the video, I've been heavily emphasizing that one of the major dilemmas that Honglu has to come to terms with is the fact that he basically has to carry the secrets of every single horrifying thing he's ever been shown alone to his grave. And time again, I've also explained why that's the particular case. But you see, a major revelation later on in the story that we're revealed to is Kongqiu's presence during one particular moment. The moment where we saw Honglu trying to essentially save the people who are falling to their demise from the infamous restructuring day of H-Corp, an event that would have your physical home space be redistributed in the proper alignment of how much worth you have as an individual. This simple act of kindness would probably from then on be ingrained as a core memory for him, because fast forward many years later, as fate would have it, the two characters would inevitably be reunited once again, both now in possession of completely opposing ideologies. And despite how they both look and act, these two actually also share a lot of similarities, yet both characters are also unaware of this fact regarding the other. For one, both were once individuals who were essentially pushed into the depths of despair after witnessing a traumatic event. Both shunned away from revealing the truth to the public, and both ultimately attained different answers in their methods to what they think might fix Hong Yuan. Whereas Khonshu, despite all of the countless tragedies he has undoubtedly faced, still remains steadfast in his beliefs. On the other hand, Honglu has effectively shunned away from it, always fearful of the lingering thought that he might bring harm to any other person if he casually slips up. So as one would expect, when he is confronted face to face with two of his siblings and asked about what Hong Yuan truly needs, he gives away a hollow answer in the hopes of it satisfying Khonshu's question. And while Xiao Huan is quick to dismiss it, Khonshu doesn't so easily relent.
하지만 나는 아직 듣지 못했다. 네가 머뭇거리며 주저하다 끝내 뱉지 못한 그 단어, 깊게 파묻힌 그 한마디를.
저는
그건 표현하려 애를 쓰고 있으나 사단은
물러나라 자로. 더 혹독한 겨울을 주지 않으면 아우의 푸름을 짐작할 길이 없겠구나. 더 헤아려라. 깊게 파묻은 네 인의를 파헤쳐 내게 보여라.
When you have two characters that have went through the same traumatic experiences, and both, by their own admissions, came out the other side in very different circumstances, you get the masterclass of character interactions between Khonshu and Honglu. And I mean, honestly speaking, what better character is there other than Khonshu to force Honglu to bring himself the courage to speak his truth? You know, the guy who's literally supposed to portray one of the most crucial figures in Chinese culture/history. And might I add, I also love how they made it so the conflict between the two characters aren't fought with just pure physical means, but also one that necessitates psychological arguments. In fact, Chu was also the first character to actually figure out the drastic changes contrasting between Honglu in his childhood to Honglu in his current self, or at least the bit pure of genuine kindness that he once saw in the past. So after much anticipation and hesitation from the man himself, probably again garnered from the lifetime of trauma he has from keeping his truth a secrecy to the public, he finally brings up the courage to utter his truth to the question. Because in his own words, what Hong Yuan needs
상냥함이에요. 그것은 관심이고 동시에 감싸줌이죠. 바로 옆에서 울고 있는 친구가 있다면 같이 슬퍼하고 기뻐하는 것이라 생각해요. 상냥하면서도 따뜻하게.
Believe it or not, this moment is actually what cemented Honglu as my personal best character. The answer he came up with isn't one that is the correct answer to give. He isn't giving away what he thinks is a logical answer to the question given by his brother, rather an answer that genuinely comes from the bottom of his heart. An answer formed stemming from the lifetime of experiences he had growing under the roof of Hong Yuan. And whilst it's obviously an answer that differs from the rest of his brothers, whereas Jia Huan gives out an answer that is more reflected on the reality of Hong Yuan, and Khonshu himself gives a more logical reasoning behind what Hong Yuan needs, Honglu's answer is more so spiritual and a much more naive yet genuine one by contrast. And genuine would also actually be a pretty good word to describe Honglu as a character, because whilst his struggle is represented by nihilism and inaction, most of his defining moments is when he witnessed, no pun intended, his companions and friends overcome their biggest obstacles by taking action, not running away from it. And maybe that's just the core of the reason of my appreciation for Honglu in general. I just genuinely appreciate how Project Moon could tackle some of the most common struggles that most people do tend to face in their lives, such as maybe being fearful of having your opinions getting shut down because the opposition considers it irrelevant, which then probably prompts you not to speak up as much in group discussions, or maybe genuinely feeling like you just don't have anyone to share your burdens with or just latch on to. I mean, these are all very common obstacles that most of us do tend to face in our day-to-day lives. That is, then all converted into one single character, with that character's struggle/themes being the main topic to explore in a single canto. And ultimately, it is with this same truth that Honglu once thought he had buried that he finally gained the courage to stand face to face with the source of evil that had brought him so much misfortune in the first place. Yes, I'm specifically talking about the elders and his own grandmother. And it is with their banishment/defeat that he reached his own version of enlightenment. That is, even if time were fleeting, even if all will one day perish, it's still alright to feel the emotions he feels, because being afraid of change is natural to every single living being. changing, but change in itself is also a natural part of life. So with this new profound knowledge that he has gained after his return to Hongyuan, he also gained a new outlook on life and has since stopped disassociating out of the current reality and started actually showing more emotions, such as concern over a fellow sinner. And I am genuinely excited to see where Project Moon could take Honglu's stories next. But only time will tell from this point on to where his journey will take him next in the future. Alright, that'll be all from me today. As always, thank you for watching.